Before I hit record for each episode of this Podcasting Secret Show, I tell my guests that I am looking for great stories. And I ask them which stories they want to tell and what I can do to prompt them to tell those stories. And I tell them that stories are how they can say something that will be remembered and will have influence and impact and cause change. The guest today is literally the story doctor. He has a PhD focused on storytelling, and he works for the StoryBrand. And he's going to teach us how to tell great stories from our podcast and tell us the biggest mistake that podcasters usually make when they tell stories. Welcome to the Podcasting Secret Show, where successful creators share their best stories, secrets, and strategies. I'm your host, Nathan Gwilliam. Hello, incurable creators. Welcome to this episode of Podcasting Secrets. Today, I am joined by the story doctor, JJ Peterson. He was the host of Marketing Made Simple, a podcast that he used to run, and he's working on launching a new one. He is the head of StoryBrand and has a PhD in narrative theory. That basically means he has a doctorate in storytelling. He also teaches in the master's program of marketing at Vanderbilt University. Thanks so much for joining us today, JJ.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, can you start off by sharing with us something that most people don't know about you?
I'm an open book a little bit, so a lot of people know a lot about me, but probably something your audience doesn't know about me, if they've even followed me in other areas, is that I spent a little bit of time in Hollywood because I was studying stories and movie and films. And so I was actually, I was on an episode of The Office, and I got to meet Steve Carell, and I was on an episode of The West Wing. In fact, that was my very first TV show I ever did. I did Ghost Whisperer. And then probably my biggest quote unquote claim to fame is I was a dancer. And if they're listening to this, they're not going to see the humor in this. But if they're watching this, they're going to see that I do not have the body of a dancer. I'll tell you that right now. And I was a dancer in a Missy Elliott music video. My character's name was Fat Michael Jackson.
Well, all this talk of Hollywood, I should have introduced you as J.J. Abrams and not J.J. Peterson.
Yep. I have been confused for him before, but I am not him, no.
Okay, can you tell us about your story of becoming this expert in storytelling?
Yeah, so, I grew up, my dad was a pastor, and growing up, I watched my dad really, he's one of the most amazing storytellers I've ever been around. And I would watch him control a room, like whether it was from the pulpit or in our living room, with stories. And he could make people laugh, he could make people cry. And he was able to do it by being loud and being really soft. And even when we were kids, when we would travel, we'd go on road trips. A lot of families listened to music or played games. My dad put on Garrison Keillor. So we literally listened to a storyteller while we would go on road trips. We'd listen to these really long stories. So I grew up just loving stories. And as I got older, I started studying communication, and my undergrad degree is in communication. My master's degree is actually in theology and the arts. So it's a study of story in television and film and art. And then ultimately my PhD was in communication, but really I studied narrative theory. And I wanted to understand, how do stories work? Why are stories so powerful? And how can we as communicators be better at telling stories? And ultimately, I taught at a couple different universities, and ultimately I met Donald Miller, who is the founder of StoryBrand, and who'd created a framework around how to teach companies and thought leaders how to tell great stories. And so it was kind of funny because at the time when I met him, I was a dean of students at a university, and I was a professor, and I was leaving there because I had just sold a reality television show to a production company. The reality
show was that?
Yeah, well, nobody's ever seen it, never made it on air, but it was called Bad A Brothers. The premise about it is my brothers and I were so not bad A that we couldn't even say the word badass. We couldn't say the word. And so we wanted to become more bad A. And the way that we did that was by traveling around the United States and finding those old laws that are still on the books. Like you can't cross a Minnesota border with a duck on your head. That's a law. Or you can't have an ice cream cone in your back pocket in Atlanta. And we would research the history behind those laws, and then we would break those laws so we could be more bad A. And so that was like I was leaving the education world and kind of going more full-time into the Hollywood world. And I met Donald Miller, and he said, why don't you come out? I'm just getting this thing started where I teach companies how to tell better stories. Why don't you come out and figure out how to brand yourself and brand this television show? And that was about 13 years ago. I flew out to Nashville and went to the workshop and immediately fell in love with this framework, and really basically was like, this is the thing I've been trying to teach and study and do for the last 20 years. And this guy I feel like he figured it out, and he didn't even have a PhD. I was like, when he asked me to come, I was like, really? Okay, this is cute. This is what I do. And then I came and I was like, oh, you jerk, you figured it out. And I have now for the past 11, really 12 years, been helping companies and thought leaders understand the power of story, how to tell stories in a way that invites audiences and customers in to engage at a deeper level. So I've done it with everybody from, a bakery here in Nashville to I was just working with certified Angus beef, and everybody, Microsoft, everybody kind of in between. I teach them how to tell powerful stories.
I love it. Can you give us an example of a powerful story that you helped a company to develop?
Yeah. So now this is, I want everybody to lean in because this is the secret. We're really breaking things down here. This is actually a secret. Most people, when they think of stories, what they think of, or the powerful stories, are the stories that make you laugh or the stories that make you cry. Right? They're that thing that connects to us emotionally. The reality is, the way that the science works, the most powerful stories are actually the stories that make the most sense to us. Now, sometimes they can be stories that make us cry or make us laugh, but that's not actually the power of story. The power of story is in simplicity and clarity. There is actually a formula to how you should tell stories. And this is really all based on how the brain works. This goes all the way back to Aristotle and Plato. They were the ones who really initially started the study of story. And they said, way back in poetics, they would say the best way, if you want to change people's minds, if you want to influence culture, the way to do it is through story. Now, here's what we need to understand as communicators. Again, business leaders, thought leaders, people who are like even in the podcast space, we are competing against a lot of noise that's out there, right? Depending on the research that you read, the average person receives between 3,000 and 5,000 commercial messages a day.
Oh my goodness.
We're also making about 35,000 decisions in a single day. I mean, every microsecond, we're actually making decisions, and most of it is from our subconscious. So we have all this noise that's coming at us. Now, our brains are really designed to keep us alive. Like our brains, do a lot of physical function, but our brains are designed to keep us alive. And there's two ways our brain really, really focuses on keep us alive. The first thing is that our brain is always looking for information that contributes to our survival and thriving. So we are scanning our environment and only really subconsciously paying attention to the things that help us survive and thrive. So for instance, if everybody listening, if we were all in a stadium right now, I could get up on a stage and I could say, how many people here know how many chairs are in this stadium? And nobody would raise their hand. I could say, how many lights are in the stadium? Nobody would raise their hand. If I said, how many people know where the exits are? Every single person would raise their hand because that's what their brain did when it came in. They're like, I don't need to know how many chairs are here. I need to know where the exits are. The other thing our brain is trying to do is actually conserve calories. What I mean by that is that at any given moment, our brain actually has a limited number of calories that it is dedicating towards thought and thinking and processing information. the more we have to think, the more diminishes. And it kind of goes up and down all day long. And when we're tired, when you're exhausted, when you're daydreaming, that's actually your brain replenishing those calories. So what our brain does then is says, if the information that I'm receiving is too complicated, that's going to cause me to burn too many calories. So I need to stop paying attention. And if I can't figure out very quickly how what I'm being told or what I'm reading contributes to my survival and thriving, then my brain also is designed to tune out. What that means for us as communicators and people who are telling stories is, if we are not communicating in such a way that actually shows how what we're offering people contributes to their survival and thriving, and we don't do it in a way that causes them to have to not burn any calories, their brain is actually designed to tune us out. So we as communicators, as podcasters, as businesses have to figure out how to break through that noise. The most powerful way to break through that noise is through story. So I say all that to set it up of like, why is this so important? When I'm talking about story, I'm not just talking about being entertaining. I'm not just talking about owning a room like what my dad did. What I'm talking about is, how do we get our information through this sea of noise to people in a way that shows them that by working with us, listening to us, buying our products and services, subscribing to our podcast, that we communicate in such a way that they see us as helping them survive and thrive. So the way you do that, like I said, is through story. Now, story is formulaic. There are really 7 elements to every good story. Every story should follow this formula. I might ruin movies for you here real quick, because you'll see how every movie works like this. In a movie, you immediately start out with a main character who wants something. That's story element number 1. The main character has to want something, and that something has to be very clear. If it's not clear, we're out. We don't pay attention. The second thing that happens in a story is that character has to encounter a problem. The problem is the hook of the story. If there's no problem in a story, if the main character is just walking around a park all day smiling, that's not a good story. We're not going to pay attention to that. But if a meteor is going to destroy the Earth, now we pay attention. Are they going to stop the meteor? So element 1, the main character has to want something. Element 2, the main character has to encounter a problem. Element 3 is that main character then meets a guide, somebody who's going to help them overcome the problem.
Oh, this is the hero's journey.
It is. And the guide is typically Yoda, Gandalf, right? It's right. Somebody, Mary Poppins even, somebody who's coming alongside to help the hero win. Then the hero gives the guide gives the hero a plan. The 4th element is there's always a plan. You'll see that in almost every movie where they say, here's the plan, or what's the plan? Then there's a moment. The 5th element is the hero must be called to action. And then the final 2 elements is there has to be stakes in the story. So we have to be rooting for a happy ending, success, or know what kind of pain they're trying to avoid, which is failure. Those are the 7 elements that make up a good story. A hero who wants something, who encounters a problem, who meets a guide, who gives them a plan that calls them to action that results in success or failure. Now, why that is the formula is because that's kind of been the way that story formula has been refined over the years to directly connect with audiences.
Okay, before we go deeper into this, let's overlay that on a couple of famous movies.
Yeah.
And so you can show us how this works. So take us through Star Wars Episode 4.
Which one's 4?
That's the very first one that ever came out.
The very first one that ever came out, right? So there's Luke Skywalker is the hero, right? And he wants to make a difference, right? He wants to become a Jedi. That's what he wants. The problem is that the Empire, the villain is there, and they're destroying planets. So we have to be able to, the Empire's getting in the way, disrupting kind of the universe, disrupting his training, all of that. He ends up meeting Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is the guide. The plan is ultimately to get to the Death Star, destroy the Death Star, and trust the Force. That's really the idea there. The call to action comes where the moment is that he has to actually fly down the tunnel before the Death Star becomes active. Like the Death Star is going to destroy another planet. And we know that if the Death Star is destroyed, ultimately everybody wins. It's happily ever after. If the Death Star is not destroyed, then the Empire wins and the rebellion is defeated. So that's kind of the simplistic there, right? So even with, Lord of the Rings, you've got Frodo, who really wants to save Middle Earth. And the problem is he's got to get the ring to Mordor. He meets Gandalf, who helps him along the way. The plan is they've got to take the ring to Mordor. We know that the whole time, and throw the ring in the lava. There's a moment where everything almost seems lost, where Sauron is going to take over Middle Earth if this doesn't happen immediately. And we've been kind of foreshadowing the whole time of what a happy ending looks like. They even show Samwise like with a little kid and his wife happy. So we know the Shire is saved, everybody's happy, or the Shire's on fire and everybody dies.
Yeah, I love it. And I could give you Karate Kid. I could give you Greatest Showman. I could give you any of these, and you could take
100%. Now, so that's movie theory, but how does that actually then apply to us as thought leaders, as business owners? What we need to understand is that most businesses, when they're trying to do marketing or get themselves out there or try to get people to listen to what they're saying, sadly, what they're doing is telling the wrong story. They're positioning themselves as the hero of the story. If our customers or our audience are living as the heroes of their own story, and we as a business or thought leaders are the hero of our story, we're actually in competing stories. We can't be in those competing stories. So whenever you're communicating with an audience, what you have to do is understand your audience or your customer is the hero. What does that mean? You need to know what story are they living, or what story are you going to invite them into that you get to be a part of. So what does your hero want? That's actually, from a business perspective, what I always talk with clients is, what are people Googling to try to find you? That's literally what they want. And they are looking for something out there, and we need to know what that is. And it needs to be so clear that they don't have to burn any calories to understand it when we say it out loud.
And it needs to be a core reason that's really driving their life, and not something really shallow.
Well,
with Luke Skywalker, it wasn't just to get off of the planet and see the universe, right? It was a deeper good versus evil why that motivated him to do it. Today's episode of Podcasting Secrets is brought to you by Pod Allies, the done-for-you podcasting services solution. When I speak with CEOs about their podcast, one of the most common comments that I hear is that they know they need a podcast, but they don't have time. Have you ever wondered how some businesses find a way to still run their podcasts while juggling their crazy day-to-day operations? The secret might be simpler than you think. Let me introduce you to Pod Allies. This is a service that's changed the game for businesses in the podcasting world. Pod Allies is a done-for-you podcast production and marketing service. They understand that while many businesses understand the immense value podcasting can have for their business, finding time to produce, syndicate, promote, and monetize a show can be challenging. Pod Allies offers a dedicated team to handle virtually all aspects of your podcast production. From strategy and branding to audio and video editing and guest scheduling, they've got you covered. They even take care of creating blog posts, transcripts, and syndicating your content across multiple platforms. What sets Pod Allies apart is their use of PodUp, their proprietary podcasting software suite. This allows them to streamline the entire podcasting process, saving you time, effort, and a bunch of money. If you're ready to become a thought leader, connect with your audience, and grow your business through podcasting without all of the investment of time and cost of doing it yourself, Pod Allies might be the perfect solution for you. To learn more or to schedule a free consultation with a podcast expert, visit podallies.com. That's podallies.com. Now back to the show.
Let me just ask you. So let's play this out right here, and we'll do a little consulting storytelling for you. Okay.
Yeah.
So for your audience, would you say people who listen to your podcast, What do they want?
I think they want freedom, actually.
Okay.
I think I use the Toyota 5 whys exercise where
Okay.
you say, why would they do this? And then whatever the answer is, you ask why to that. And you just keep asking why to the answer. And usually by the fifth answer, you're to the core motive why people actually do what they do. And I think people podcast so they can have freedom to have the lifestyle they want, the freedom to provide for the people they love the way they want, the freedom to, do what they want with their career and their life. I think to me, that's the core reason why people want to build a venture around a podcast.
Love it. Okay. So freedom is fantastic, but in reality, that's actually very vague from a messaging perspective, right?
Okay.
So like if I was an alien that just came down and I asked you, what do you do? And you said, I give people freedom. And you're like, oh, so you're Dave Ramsey. You help people with finances so they can be free. And you're like, oh, no, I don't do that. Or they say
Right.
So you actually fight sex slave trafficking. Nope. And so freedom is fantastic, but we actually now, this is where it goes back to that clarity piece of a clear story.
Yeah.
You want to pair freedom with the clarity of what you offer. So you did say it there for a second. Basically, people want to build a podcast or create a podcast venture that gives them freedom in their life.
That's right.
So now we have the clarity of what you actually offer is you help your audience build a podcast that gives them freedom. That is now your character want. And so you need to be talking about that. Your website, your social media. You don't want to just say freedom. And really, you don't want to just say podcast. You want a clear idea so that anybody who is your type of customer can see themselves in that story.
Yeah.
So in your brand narrative, that's the first piece. So we name that. We say our character wants a podcast or just starting a podcast venture that can bring them freedom. Now we go, what's their problem? So now tell me, what problems are people experiencing that you can solve? Because we're the authors of the story, right? For your podcast. What are we going to invite them into? So what problems does your customers experience that you can help solve?
Yeah, to create a venture around a podcast, they probably need more than 30 different technologies that they've got to cobble together. That probably will cost about $2,000 a month. Those technologies will miss a whole bunch of the functionality that they don't have. They'll need functionality that those technologies don't have. It'll just take way too much time and effort to try to do it because they blow so much time on just the publishing part of it. They probably won't have any time for the marketing and the growth and the monetization part of it. And then they'll get sick of it because it won't be worth it. They'll be putting in all this time and no one will be listening. Not very many people will be listening to it and they won't be making hardly any money off of it. And then they'll give up and quit.
Okay. Those are, yes, everybody who is working on a podcast venture right now who's listening is nodding their head, right? Like they're definitely nodding their head. So now what I would do with you is I would say, which of those problems can your podcast or your services solve?
All of them.
You can solve all of them. Great. So those are the problems then in a brand narrative that you need to be talking about. People only pay attention to your brand if you can solve a problem for them. And if they're not aware of what problem you can solve, they actually aren't trusting you. And so that's the part of where, and if they don't feel that problem, they're not going to trust you, right? And so we only pay people. In fact, here's the other little trick in this is we actually file companies in our brain based on the problems that they solve. And so like if I have a headache, you would offer me aspirin or Tylenol. You would probably, like if I said I have a headache, you have a list of things that can fix that. Right. If I said I had a stomach ache or my stomach's a little upset, you would offer me Tums or, Pepto-Bismol, because you don't think about those brands outside of the problem they solve. When you are branding yourself and the story you're inviting customers into, you need to be talking about your customers' problems all the time. Now, I won't go into all of this with all the rest of the 7 because we don't have time here, but those 2, I would argue, are the most important for any thought leader or podcaster or company to understand. If you don't clearly articulate what it is that your customer wants, they don't know why they need to listen to you or don't know what they're getting out of your product, they're not sticking around. You have to make them burn too many calories to understand, they're out.
Yeah.
And if you don't talk about the problems that you solve and position the episodes or the products you sell as a solution to those problems, there's no reason for them to pay attention to you. Now,
Yeah.
we have the big podcasts out there, like Smartless and Good Hang, that are fun and entertaining. That's the problem they solve for us. And a lot of us think we have to compete at that level. We don't. Our job is to find our audience that wants what we offer, that can be helped by the knowledge or products or services that we have to solve a problem. If we articulate that in everything that we do. So our tagline was marketing made simple, where we believe marketing should be easy and it should work. So basically, when we're talking about that, what we're saying is the problem with a lot of marketing that's out there, or the problem marketers experience, is that marketing feels really complicated. You got to keep up with a lot of stuff. And I'm throwing spaghetti at a wall and I don't know what works. We say marketing that it's easy and works. And then we gave practical tips for people in order to solve their marketing problems. There was no question about why you were there. Now, we were also tried to be entertaining and fun and approachable and caring and all of that, but that's why people listen to us. So that's just kind of I would say, when we're getting back to the story of like, what story should we be telling? How do we tell better stories? Every time that you hop on a stage or you hop on a microphone, you need to be thinking about what problem are you solving for the people who are listening. And you need to articulate that to make the stories interesting. And then every story you tell, everything that you bring into that should then be in that narrative. In fact, I'll just give another part. The guide part is a whole other thing. It's about, then you come in as the guide. You are the guide to your customer's hero, and you need to show them that you know what you're doing and have empathy for them. So the story that you asked me to tell, my story, right? The only pieces of my story that I told you or told this audience in the beginning was dealing with my dad, being a preacher and talking and being a good storyteller. I talked about being in Hollywood, which is about story. I talked about teaching story. I talked about working with companies with story. I talked about selling a reality show, which has to do with story. I didn't tell you any other piece of my story that didn't contribute to that. Nobody here on this podcast knows what my religious affiliation is currently, or political affiliation, or my marital status. None of that came up because it doesn't matter to the audience story. If I was talking to dads out there, then I would talk about being a dad all the time. So if I'm talking to a group of dads, then the only thing I talk about myself in that context is being a dad. Because when I'm positioning myself as a guide in the customer's story or the audience's story, I'm only talking about the stuff in my story that relates to theirs, that helps me help them win. Everything else is a distraction. So there really are 7 elements. And that's when I work with companies and with thought leaders, that's what I do, is I walk through and help them create those 7 elements. And really what you're doing is identifying, what does our customer want? What are the problems that our customer is experiencing or audience experiencing? How do we position ourselves as a guide? What is our plan for them? What is our call to action? And have I cast a vision for success and failure in their lives? And when you do that, those are the kind of stories that actually break through the noise and invite people into a story where you get to serve them as their guide and they get to be the hero.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, I know we're just about out of time. I have just a couple more quick questions for you here.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of a company that you've worked with and helped them develop their story, and maybe a case study of how that helped change or transform their business?
Yeah, so I worked with Tempur-Sealy, which is the largest mattress company in the world, but they don't sell as much direct to consumer. So what they had to identify is who was actually the hero of their story. On the grand scale, the end customer is the hero of the story. So identifying what they want, what problems they're experiencing, yes. But their way that they can really own the market is through mattress dealers. And so the marketing that we actually created and the pamphlets and the tools that we created were not actually for the end user. They were for the store owners. So we needed to identify, What do store owners want? They want a more simple way to sell mattresses. What's their problem? They can't train their salespeople fast enough to be able to get things through the door. We come in as their guide. We give them a plan, a very simple sheet that actually allows them to sell quickly. What's their call to action? Ask this question when somebody comes in. And then we say, once you do all of this, what's going to happen is you're going to stop being overwhelmed and confused and selling less mattresses. And you're actually going to sell more mattresses overall, not just Tempur-Sealy.
Yeah.
So we had to create, they were trying to like win the direct to consumer route, and they still have to keep that strong. But they actually realized as they were telling the wrong story, they were trying to tell the same story to the end users. They were the customer as the store owner, but the store owner is living a different story. They stopped telling Tempur-Sealy story and they started telling the store owner story, and they started to win again.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so would you say that the biggest mistake that people make in their storytelling is making themselves the hero instead of making the customer the hero?
Absolutely. And the way you avoid that is really with two things. There's two words I can give you: empathy and authority. Empathy and authority is whatever you establish what your customer's problem is. So for you, that, you know, they're spending too much money, they're wasting time on stuff that doesn't get them listens, and they get frustrated. You then, as a guide, want to have empathy for all of those problems. I get it. I understand this. I have been in that situation. But authority is, here's how I've solved it for other people. Testimonies, bringing guests on who have listened to you, who've overcome the problem, talking about how you overcame the problem yourself. You're not needing to bring in all the other things into that story. All you have to do to position yourself as a guide and not be the hero of the story is empathy and authority.
I love it. Okay, JJ, if our audience has enjoyed this episode like I have and they want to learn more about you and your work, what are the best ways for them to do that?
The easiest thing to do is just go to Dr. JJ Peterson, so drjjpeterson.com, and you can find out about what I do there. And also if you email me from that site, I can send you actually a little, I have a PDF that I will send you on how to tell a short story, basically how to do your elevator pitch and a quick short story in order to capture your audience's attention. So I would say just go to drjjpeterson.com. And if you want to sign up there, I can send you that PDF so you can learn how to tell a short story even better.
And Peterson in that URL is with an O, not an E.
Yes, Peterson.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, JJ, for all the value that you added. To my audience out there, if you're looking for a great podcasting platform with more than 50 integrated tools to help you create, grow, and monetize your podcast venture, you can get a free trial and a free 14-day podcasting course at podup.com. Thank you so much.